And long ago, the psalmist asked the question, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? That's Psalm 11 and verse 3. In the psalm, David stresses our need to place our trust in God in verse 1 when he says, "In Jehovah put I my trust. How say ye to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain." So he's saying, I'm going to place my trust in God. I'm not going to flee someplace. I'm going to flee to God and have Him be the one who I can rely upon. Verse 2, though, sets forth the reason that he is going to place his trust in God and allow God to be that one who is his mountain. When he says, "For lo, the wicked bend their bow, they make ready their arrow upon the string, that they may privily shoot at the upright in heart." In other words, here's all these wicked individuals out here. They have plans to destroy me. That's why I'm going to place my trust in Jehovah. But we see now that here's the plans for those who are wicked to destroy the righteous. And verse 3 that we read just a moment ago sets forth how they're going to accomplish that destruction. To destroy the righteous, you need to destroy the foundations. Once the foundations are destroyed, then the house falls. But David reminds us in verse 4 that God is the one who rules. When he says that the Lord is in his holy temple, the Lord's throne is in heaven. God rules. God is on his throne. He is king. It's there in heaven. And these wicked have no way of destroying him. The latter part of verse 4 and then verse 5, he sets forth the omniscience of God, that God is all-knowing. When he says that his eyes behold, his eyelids try the children of men. The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence his soul hateth. God sees everything. He sees what the righteous is doing. He sees what the wicked is doing. He is truly omniscient. And verse 6 and verse 7, he reminds us that God is not only omniscient, but tied now to that omniscience is his justice. That God is a just God. That upon the wicked he shall rain snares, fire, and brimstone, and a horrible tempest. This shall be the portion of their cup. For the righteous Jehovah loveth righteousness, his countenance doth behold the upright. So God in his justice is going to punish that one who is wicked, and he's going to justify the righteous. In our nation, and sadly in the church, as we'll discuss this morning primarily, foundations are being destroyed. And possibly they have been destroyed to the point of being irreparable. As we look at the immorality, the ungodliness, the worldliness, materialism that is seen in our nation, we see the foundations being destroyed. We looked at it first from the standpoint of the foundations of the home 3 weeks ago, and how that God established the home. And in that home we have the very foundations that are to be established. But we also noted how that the home is being attacked both without the home and even within the home. And those attacks are having its effect upon the home itself and thus the foundations of society. But that took us to our second point, that we noted that the foundations of society are being destroyed and attacked. Our nation is in trouble. We look around us and we see the crime that is continuing to rise, and let's face it, we live in fear almost today because of all of the crime that's around us. Abortion, how that our nation has justified the murdering of these innocent children. Approximately through the years that it has been legalized, 55 million innocent babies have been slaughtered in the womb. Sexuality, certainly a problem within our society. That God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plain because of their homosexuality. But we glorify it within our society today. Solomon would state that righteousness exalteth the nation, but sin is a reproach to any people, Proverbs 14 and verse 34. Well, we see the sin and how it is reproaching our society. But then this morning, I want us to notice the foundations of the church. Because the foundations of the church are also being attacked and being destroyed. With the destruction of the home, there is a lack of respect that is seen, and a lack of respect for authority in particular. Children, as they grow up within the home, are to learn a respect for authority. It is going to be seen initially in the authority of their parents, and they learning respect for their parents. But within our society, that learning of respect has been destroyed. It's been decimated. Children are growing up with a disrespectful attitude. Oftentimes, that disrespect is seen in openness by the parents, and the parents do absolutely nothing about it. That stifle their creativity, for example. Well, they need to be stifled a little bit by using the Board of Education at the seat of learning. But we're told, no, you can't do that nowadays. In fact, it's called by many, if you just spank a child, it's child abuse. There's one website that I went to that said that it was sexual abuse if a parent spanks their child. You have sexually abused that child. Well, no, you haven't. You've been exercising that God-given right and obligation that a parent should be exercising in teaching his child and making that child learn respect for his parents. But it's not done in our society today. As a result, the disrespect that is seen within the home starts spilling over into every aspect of our society. Our life. It is seen in regards to school and how that children in the schools disrespect their teachers, disrespect the administration, and heaven help that teacher who tries to exercise some discipline over children, because they generally are going to be attacked by the parents that their little Johnny or Susie could never do anything wrong. And so the disrespect grows. And then that disrespect is seen in relationship to the government. That Why should they respect the government when they don't have any respect for the home, or they don't have any respect for their teachers? What's the government? What are they going to do? And so it is seen from an immediate standpoint in relationship to the police. And then it goes into a greater and wider disrespect, government in general. It's seen in relationship to jobs. When they don't learn respect within the home and within the schools, and they don't respect the government, why should we expect them to respect those individuals and their employers? And so they don't. Nor do they respect anything about their employment. They don't respect the company that they work for, and so they don't think anything about taking a little bit of a discount here, or taking this little thing. That's big government, or that's big companies anyway, and they won't miss it. No respect seen. You see it in respect to other individuals. That since they don't respect themselves, because they didn't learn to respect themselves growing up, there's no respect for other individuals. It all centers upon self and whatever I want, whatever my desires are. Forget anyone else. They're unimportant. They need to be just here to support me, and they do everything that I want. They glorify me. What about you glorifying? No. They're worthless. And so, there's a disrespect for other people. That's what our society has come to. But that disrespect, because they failed to learn respect within the home, spills over into the church as well. And so, what we have seen within the Lord's church now is a general disrespect for spiritual matters. People don't respect God and divine things. They don't respect God Himself. How many times do we hear about, quote, the man upstairs? Say, oh, well, he didn't mean anything by that. Well, the problem is you have torn God from the exalted position that He deserves, and you tried to place Him on the scale of being simply a man and nothing more than a man. Israel did that in the long ago, and God says, I'm going to condemn you for it. You thought that I was such a one as thyself. Read the 50th Psalm, and especially verse 20 and 21. He says, I'll reprove you. Why? Because you thought that I was like you are. You thought I was a man, but I'm not, God says. And to speak of God as simply a man upstairs is to show disrespect for God. But how many times do we also hear God's name being used in a frivolous way? The idea back behind that which is stated in the Ten Commandments in relationship, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. In other words, you don't take these spiritual matters, and specifically God's name, and use them in a frivolous way. The Israelites were so keen to observe that, they would not even pronounce the name Yahweh or Jehovah. We don't really know how it's pronounced because they wouldn't pronounce it. And they would substitute the word Lord many times for that instead of referring to the very name of God. Just to simply so they would not take and use the Lord's name in a frivolous way, a worthless way. How many times do we do that? And we take God's name that should be exalted and should be respected, and we use it in a frivolous manner. Use it for any old thing that comes along. Many times, if we do not use God's name, we use a form of that name, a substitution for that name. For example, gosh, golly, or Jesus is gee whiz. And thus we will use a substitute for God's name, but in reality it's still God's name. And we're taking that and using God then in just a common way. We're taking the Lord's name in vain. Many years ago, in a congregation of the Lord's church, and then a young man was asked to lead a prayer, and he began the prayer with Daddy-O. Now, thankfully, those who were leaders in that congregation corrected the young man. But the point is the disrespect that we see in relationship to God. That we think that He can be called in a way like unto that. We can take God's name and just use it in any old way. God is not to be considered in that way. We need to learn a respect for God. In Isaiah, we call it the calling of Isaiah. It starts in the 6th chapter of his book. And that calling is precipitated by a vision of God. He sees God. He is there and he sees two seraphs. And it says in verse 3 that one cried unto the other and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory. So here's these two seraphs. We generally think of them as angels. But the seraphim. And here they are, and they're proclaiming the holiness of God. That God is set apart. He is sanctified. He's not like unto man. He's not man, and He's not like unto this world. He is to be held in honor and glory. The whole earth is full of His glory. Isaiah, upon seeing this vision of God, and these seraphs who are crying about the holiness of God, look at what it caused him to say, verse 5. Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Now, why did he say that? Look at the last phrase of this. For mine eyes have seen the King, Jehovah of hosts. I've seen God, and that has caused me to realize that I am unworthy, that I am one who has sinned, that I am undone, I have unclean lips, I live in the midst of people of unclean lips. Why? Because he saw the Lord of hosts. We need to get a view of the nature of God. Because far too often we no longer have a view of God and the respect and the reverence that He demands. in the 111th Psalm in verse 9. He says that he sent redemption unto his people. He hath commanded his covenant forever. Holy and reverend is his name. His name is holy and reverend because that's his nature. And we are recognizing the very nature of God when we recognize that his name is to be holy and reverent. It is to be revered, not held to something that is commonplace. The very basic idea of profane, something that is profane, it comes from the word which means common. And it goes back to the idea of holiness, that here is something that is holy. It has been set apart. If I can use a trite illustration, here's a timer and it has a clock in it. If this timer was somehow sanctified, then it would be turned over to the use of God, God's use, spiritual matters. It would then be profane for me to take this timer, since it has been turned over to God and to be used for spiritual matters, to take it and to use it, for example, for cooking a meal. Now, you have to have a timer in order to make sure that you don't cook something too long, or something along that line. You have then taken that which has been consecrated to God and you've used it in a common way. That's the word profane. You have profaned it because it is to be dedicated and consecrated to the service of God and not to be used for any other way. Now then, that goes to the idea of holy and reverend is his name. You are not to take the name of God because it is revered. It is holy. And to use it in a common way. To use it with our everyday life. You have profaned the name of God. Why is it wrong, though? Because of the respect and the reverence that we have for God himself. And when we get that view of God, then you're not going to take those spiritual things and use them in a common way. You're not going to profane those spiritual things. Why? Because you have a vision of God and his holiness. Hebrews, the 10th chapter, and verse 31 thus. Hebrew writer would state that it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Why is it fearful? Well, when you don't do what he says, then it's fearful because of what he can do and what he will do. Jesus would say in Matthew the 10th chapter and verse 28, "Fear not them which are able to kill the body, but are not able to destroy the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." Walk down some streets at night, you'll get some fear placed in you. You get that uncomfortable feeling. There's a terror that comes with it because you know you're in a place in which something might happen to you. And Jesus is saying, don't worry about that. Don't fear that. That's nothing. Fear God, because it is a fearful thing to fall into his hands. You have a respect for him because of what he can do. He can destroy both soul and body in eternal hell. And thus you fear God. You have a respect and a reverence for Him because of what He's able to do. We should have a respect and reverence for Him because He created this world. And see the awesome power that is demonstrated in the very fact that He can speak this world into existence. He didn't need billions or millions and millions of years to allow this world to evolve into what it is today. He spoke, and it is. It's much like saying, light is, light was. Or what we might think of is, He flipped on the switch and light came into existence. But He did it with the power of His Word. And as we go out at night and we look at all of the stars, and we start standing amazed at the awesome power that must have been demonstrated by just speaking all of those stars into existence in a blink of an eye. Our God is a powerful God. And when we realize that, we should recognize the seriousness of taking Him lightly, disrespecting Him. We should respect Him because of His sustaining power. That He has the power to keep this world going, to keep it in existence. Without God and His sustaining power, this world would cease to exist. Yesterday, as I was teaching a class on New Testament church with brethren in London, weekly class, yesterday's was about the 22nd class on this subject. It's put using Google Plus, and someone came on there, saw the fact that we were having a New Testament class. They put on a statement, God is dead. I couldn't respond during the class, so after the class I responded. What evidence do you have for that? I didn't have any. But also the very statement itself shows that God did exist. He couldn't be dead if He didn't exist. A professor by the name of Altizer several years ago made that statement famous, God is dead. I like the cartoon that has been put up. Atheist puts up God is dead, and a tree grows up and covers up the God or the dead part, leaving God is. Now Altizer he was not an atheist. He was simply saying that God doesn't concern Himself with the affairs of man. He's dead to us. That's false. Because if God was dead, then this world wouldn't exist. We would not exist. In Colossians 1st chapter it says about Christ that in Him all things, and King James uses consist. And that word that's translated consist means it's held together. And it's expressing the idea that without God and without Christ, that this world would just explode. God is that one who holds it together. He is that sustaining power. That without Him, there would be no sunshine, there would be no rain. And Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew the 5th chapter, says that God makes the sun to shine on the just and the unjust. He makes the rain to come upon the wicked and the good. Notice, it's God who causes the sun to shine. It's God who causes the rain to come. God is active in the affairs of man today. He is that one who is, as the psalmist here, David, in this 11th Psalm says, God's on the throne. He's in control. And He's in control today. Man might scoff at it. Man does. We've got the atheist who proudly proclaim, I know that God does not exist. They don't remain atheists very long, though, because they know that atheism cannot be established. And so they leave atheism and they go to agnosticism, that there's just not enough evidence for God's existence. Or they become infidels. An infidel, very simply, or a skeptic, is someone who is skeptical of God's existence. He doesn't believe it. He's going to ridicule the idea. You have all of those, yes, but God's still in control. They can say all that they want to. God is dead, but God is still alive and active. Their denial as such does not deny the reality of it. And we need to recognize the kingship of God, that He is still sitting on the throne, and that He is to be respected and He is to be revered. And when we do, then we start changing our attitudes. You see, the problem of disrespect is solved when we learn respect for God. It should have been learned by the parents, or taught by the parents when the child was growing up. But when we truly see a vision of God, as Isaiah saw, then it changes our whole attitude of life. Even as Isaiah said, after seeing this vision, woe is me, I'm undone, I'm a man of unclean lips, I live in the midst of a people of unclean lips. He learned respect for God because he saw the very nature of God Himself. We need to see God. We're not going to see Him physically, of course, but we need to see Him and His character, His nature. We need to see His holiness. We need to see the fact that He is just, always just, in everything that He does. And it will cause us to have a greater respect for God, and not to try to pull God down to man's level. It will cause us no longer to be disrespectful to Him, but it will cause us then to be obedient to His will. In Hebrews 11 and verse 6, in that great chapter of faith, Paul would say that the one who pleases God is that one who believes that God is. That's his existence. And that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. There's the justice of God. That's based, of course, upon what he said earlier. It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. But those who diligently seek Him, He will reward them graciously. If we fail to do what God says, it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. If we are obedient through our faith, initially in obeying the gospel by making that confession of our faith in Jesus Christ as God's Son, repenting of our sins, and being immersed in water for the forgiveness of our sins. We come then into that relationship with God, where He will reward us, where He will give us blessings, where we will have that hope of an eternity, so that when eternity does come, we'll hear those words, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant, enter into the joys of thy Lord." But also recognize God is a rewarder. And those who fail, they are going to be rewarded with punishment. That God's face will be against them. He turns away from them. He's not going to bless them. They're not going to receive that which God gives unto His children. And the only thing they have to look forward to is an eternity of torment and torture in a hellfire. A place prepared for the devil and his angels. Now, when I recognize the nature of God, it makes me respect Him, that He will be just. And He also made a way to justify us through the death of His Son, Jesus Christ. And if you have not accepted that way in which God has provided, and we would plead with you this morning to obey the gospel of Jesus Christ, to come unto Him in humble respect to God. You know, in Matthew the 5th chapter, as Jesus began the Beatitudes, He began with that very basic principle that is necessary and that we're talking about, humility. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Unless you have that type of humility, and that humility comes from seeing the very nature of God. And thus I humble myself under His will. I'm going to do His will above anything and everything else. Family, friends, job, self. That God will come first within my life. Then that's true humility. And that's seeing the very nature of God and having respect for Him. Now, if you have not been living that type of lifestyle as a Christian, and you recognize your need to come back to Him and repent, to return to service to Him, and putting Him first within your life, we would encourage you to come this morning as we stand and sing the invitation song.